Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 12 of our reading of Alfred Hitchcock Presents Stories Not for the Nervous. Now, the story that we are going to be reading and maybe finishing off today, I'm not exactly sure, is called The Other Hangman by Carter Dickson. But before we do that, we're going to go over the copyright here. Copyright information is always important when dealing with other people's intellectual property. Clearly says here, the author gratefully acknowledges the invaluable assistance of Robert Arthur in the preparation of this volume. And it says this was published by Dell, and it has all the copyright information here. Apparently this is the fourth printing, and it was published in 1968. Anyways, also, I'm going to have this on the screen for a little bit. There will be some acknowledgments here. I won't read them aloud, but they will be on the screen for you to read while I read. So, anyways, we are going to start here. Now, in the last book, they were going to hang this guy, and we're going to see what happens. I don't remember exactly where he left off, so I'm probably going to start at the top, and we're probably going to have a little overlap, and I'm sorry about that. Okay. I believe that I know that I've read. Okay. It was cold that night. I dozed off in a chair, hearing the rain and the animal cage shuffling upstairs. The colored boy was singing that part of the hymn about while the nearer waters roll, while the tempest still is high. Wait. Okay. Sorry. They woke me about 8:30 to say the Judge Hunt and all of the witnesses were out in the jail yard and they were ready to start the march. Then I realized that they were really going to hang him after all. I had to join behind the procession as I was sworn, but I didn't see Fred Jolliffe's face, and I didn't want to see it. They had given him a good wash and clean flannel shirt, and that they tucked under at the chin. He stumbled coming out of the cell and started to go in the wrong direction, but Bob Moran and the constable each had him by one arm. It was a cold, dark, windy morning. His hands were tied behind. The preacher was saying something I couldn't catch, and everything went off smoothly enough until they got halfway across the jail yard. It's a pretty big yard. I didn't look at the contraption in the middle, but at the witnesses standing over against the wall with their hats off. But Fred Jolliffe did look at it and went down flat on his knees. They hauled him up again. I heard them keep on walking and go up the stairs, which were creaky. I didn't look at the contraption until I heard a thumping sound, and we all knew something was wrong. Fred Jolliffe was not standing on the trap, nor was the bag being put over his head, although his legs were strapped. He stood with his eyes closed and his face toward the pink sky. Ed Neighbors was clinging with both hands to the rope, twirling around a little and stamping on the trap. It didn't budge. Just as I heard Ed crying something about the rain having swelled the boards, Judge Hunt ran past me to the foot of the contraption. Bob Moran started cursing pretty obscenely. "Put him on it, try it anyway," he said, and grabbed Freddie's arm. "Stick that bag over his head and give the thing a chance." "In his name," said the preacher pretty steadily. "You'll not do it if I can help it." Bob ran over like a crazy man and jumped on the trap with both feet. It was stuck fast. Then Bob turned around and pulled an Ivor Johnson .45 out of his hip pocket. Judge Hunt got in front of Fred, whose lips were moving a little. He'll have the law and nothing but the law, said Judge Hunt. Put the gun away, you lunatic, and take him back to the cell until you can make the thing work. Easy with him now. To this day, I don't think Fred Jolliffe had realized what happened. I believe he only had his belief confirmed that they never meant to hang him after all. When he found himself going down the steps again, he opened his eyes. His face looked shrunken and dazed like. But all of a sudden, it came to him in a blaze. I knew them so-and-sos would never hang me, said he. His throat was so dry he couldn't spit at Judge Hunt as he tried to do. But he marched straight and giggling across the yard. I knew them so-and-sos would never hang me, he said. We all had to sit down a minute, and we had to give Ed Neighbors a drink. Bob made him hurry up, although we didn't say much, and he was leaving to fix the trap again, when the courthouse janitor came bustling into Bob's office. Call, said he, on the new machine over there. Telephone. Let me out of here, yells Bob. I can't listen to no telephone calls now. Come out and give us a hand. But it's from Harrisburg, said the janitor. It's from the governor's office. You got to go. Stay here, Bob, said Judge Hunt. He beckoned me to stay here, and I'll answer it, he said. We looked at each other in a strange way when we went across the bridge of sighs. The courthouse clock was striking 9, and I could look down into the yard and see people hammering at the trap. After Judge Hunt had listened to that telephone call, he had a hard time putting the receiver back on the hook. I always believed in Providence in a way, says he, but I never thought it was so person-like. Fred Jolliffe is innocent. We're to call off this business, says he, and wait for a messenger from the governor. He's got the evidence of a woman. Anyway, we'll hear it later. Now, I'm not much of a hand at describing mental states, so I can't tell you exactly what we felt then. Most of it all was a fever and horror for fear they had already whisked Fred out and strung him up. But when we looked down into the yard from the bridge of sighs, we saw Ed Neighbors and the carpenter arguing over a cross-cut saw on the trap itself, and the blessed morning light coming up in glory to show us we could knock that ugly contraption to pieces and burn it. The corridor downstairs was deserted. Judge Hunt had got his wind back, and being one of those stern elocutionists who like to make complimentary remarks about God, he was going on something powerful. He sobered up when he saw that the door to Fred Jolliffe's cell was open. Even Jolliffe, said the judge, deserves to get this news first, but Fred just didn't get the news unless his ghost was listening. I told you he was very small and light. His heels were a good 18 inches off the ground as he hung by the neck from an iron peg in the wall of the cell. He was hanging from a noose made in a children's skipping rope. Black-faced, dead already, when the whites of his eyes showed in slits, and his heels swinging over a kick-away stool. No, son, we didn't think it was suicide for long. For a little while we were stunned, half crazy, naturally. It was like thinking about your troubles at 3 o'clock in the morning. But you see, Fred's hands were still tied behind him. There was a bump on the back of his head from a hammer that lay beside the stool. Someone had walked in there with the hammer concealed behind his back and stunned Fred when he wasn't looking. Had run a slip knot in the skipping rope and jerked him up a flapping to strangle there. It was the creepiest part of the business. When we got that through our heads, and we all began loudly to tell each other where we'd been during the confusion. Nobody had noticed much. I was scared green. When we gathered around the table in Bob's office, Judge Hunt took a hold of his nerve with both hands. He looked at Bob Moran, at Ed Neighbors, at Doc McDonald, and at me. One of us was the other hangman. This is the bad business, gentlemen, he said, clearing his throat a couple of times like a nervous orator before he starts. What I want to know is who, under sanity, would strangle a man when he thought we intended to do it anyway on a gallows. Okay. Then Doc McDonald turned nasty. Well, he said, if it comes to that, you might inquire where that skipping rope came from to begin with. I don't get you, said Bob Moran, bewildered like. Oh, don't you, said Doc, and sticks out his whiskers. Well, then, who was so dead set on the execution going through a schedule that he wanted to use a gun when the trap wouldn't drop? Bob made a noise as though he had been hit in the stomach. He stood looking at Doc for a minute with his hands hanging down, and then he went for him. He had Doc back across the table, banging his head on the edge when people began to crowd into the room at the yells. Funny, too, the first one in was the jail carpenter, who was pretty sore at not being told that the hanging had been called off. What do you want to start fighting for? He said, fretful like. He was bigger than Bob and had him off Doc with a couple of heaves. Why didn't you tell me what was going on? They say there ain't going to be any hanging. Is that right? Judge Hunt nodded, and the carpenter, Barney Hicks, that's who it was. I remember now. Barney Hicks looked pretty peevish and said, all right, but you hadn't ought to go fighting all over the joint like that. Then he looks at Ed Neighbors. What I want is my hammer. Where's my hammer, Ed? I've been looking all over the place for it. What did you do with it? Ed Neighbors sits up, pours himself 4 fingers of rye and swallows it. Beg your pardon, Barney, says he in the coolest voice I ever heard. I must have left it in the cell, he said, when I hanged Fred Jolliffe. Talk about silences. It was like one of those silences when the magician at the opera house fires a gun and 6 doves fly out of an empty box. I couldn't believe it, but I remember Ed Neighbors sitting big in the corner by the barred window and his shiny black coat and string tie. His hands were on his knees, and he was looking from one to the other of us, smiling a little. He looked as old as the prophets then, and he'd got enough liquor to keep the nerve from twitching beside his eye. So he just sat there very quietly, shifting the plug of tobacco around in his cheek and smiling. Judge, he said in a reflective way, you got a call from the governor at Harrisburg, didn't you? Uh-huh. I knew what it would be. A woman had come forward, hadn't she, to confess Fred Jolliffe was innocent, and she had killed Randall Frazier. Uh-huh, the woman was my daughter. Jessie couldn't face telling it here, you see. That was why she ran away from me and went to the governor. She'd have kept quiet if you hadn't convicted Fred. But why? Shouts the judge. Why? It was like this. Ed goes off in that slow way of his. She'd been on pretty intimate terms with Randall Frazier, Jessie had, and both Randall and Fred were having a whooping lot of fun, threatening to tell the whole town about it. She was pretty near crazy, I think, and, you see, on The night of the murder, Fred Jolliffe was too drunk to remember anything that happened. He thought he had killed Randall, I suppose, when he woke up and found Randall dead and blood on his hands. It's all got to come out now, I suppose, said he, nodding. Why, what did happen was that the three of them were in the back room, which Fred doesn't remember. He and Randall had a fight while they were battling Jesse. While they were baiting Jesse. Fred whacked him hard enough with that mallet to lay him out. But all the blood he got was from a big splash over Randall's eye. Jesse finished the job when Fred ran away, that's all. But you darned fools, cried Bob Moran, and began to pound the table. Why did you have to go and kill Fred when Jesse had confessed? You fellows wouldn't have convicted Jesse, would you? Said Ed, blinking at us. No, but if Fred had lived after her confession, you'd have had to. Boys, that was how I figured it out. Once Fred learned what did happen, that he wasn't guilty, and she was, he'd never have let up until he'd carried that case to the Superior Court out of your hands. He'd have screamed all over the state until they either had to hang her or send her up for life. I couldn't stand that. All I say, that was how I figured it out, although my brain's not so clear these days. So, says he, nodding and leaning over to take aim at the cuspidor. When I heard about the telephone call, I went into Fred's cell and finished the job. But don't you understand, says Judge Hunt, in the way you'd reason with a lunatic, that Bob Moran will have to arrest you for murder, and it was the peacefulness of Ed's expression that scared us. Then he got up from his chair and dusted his shiny black coat and smiled at us. Oh no, says he very clearly, that's what you don't understand. You can't do a single darn thing to me. You can't even arrest me. He's Bughouse, said Bob Moran. Am I? Said Ed affably. Listen to me. I've committed what you might call a perfect murder because I've done it legally. Judge, what time did you talk to the governor's office and get the order for the execution to be called off? Be careful now. And I said, with the whole idea of the business suddenly hitting me, it was maybe 5 minutes past 9, wasn't it, Judge? I remember the courthouse clock striking. I remember it too, said Ed Neighbors, and Doc McDonald will tell you Fred Jolliffe was dead before even that clock struck 9. I have in my pocket, says he, unbuttoning his coat, a court order which authorizes me to kill Fred Jolliffe by means of hanging by the neck, which I did between the hours of 8 and 9 in the morning, which I also did, and I did it in full legal style before the order was countermanded. Well, Judge Hunt took off his stovepipe hat and wiped his face with a bandana we all looked at him. You can't get away with this, says the judge, and grabs the sheriff's order off the table. You can't trifle with the law in that way, and you can't execute sentence alone. Look here, in the presence of a qualified medical practitioner. What do you say? What do you say to that? Well, I can produce my medical diploma, says Ed, nodding again. I may be a booze hoister and mighty unreliable, but they haven't struck me off the register yet. Your lawyers are hell on the wording of the law, says he admiringly, and it's the wording that's done for you this time. Until you get the law altered with some fancy words, there's nothing in that document that says that the doctor and the hangman can't be the same person. After a while, Bob Moran turned around to the judge with a funny expression on his face. It might have been uh, it might have been a grin. This ain't according to morals, he said. Oh, says he. A fine citizen like Fred shouldn't get murdered like that. It's awful. Someone's got to do something about it. And you said yourself this morning, Judge, he ought to have the law and nothing but law. Is Ed right, Judge? Frankly, I don't know, said Judge Hunt, wiping his face again, but so far as I know, he is. What are you doing, Robert? I'm writing him out a check for $50, says Bob Moran, surprised like. He's got to He's got to have it all nice and legal. We got to have it all nice and legal, haven't we? And that was The Other Hangman by Carter Dickson. Now we have a rather long story called Dune Roller by Julian May. And we can read this for maybe 6 more minutes. There was only 2 who saw the meteor fall into Lake Michigan long ago. One was a Potawatomi, brave hunting rabbits among the dunes on the shore. He saw the fire streak arc down over the water and was afraid because it was an omen of ill favor when the stars left the heavens and drowned themselves in the great water. The other who saw was a surgeon who snapped greedily at the meteor as it fell. Quite reduced in size by now to the bottom of the freshwater sea. The big fish took it into its mouth and then spat it out again in disdain. It was not good to eat. The meteor drifted down through the cold black water and disappeared. The sturgeon swam away, and presently he died. Dr. Ian Thorne squatted beside a shore pool and netted things. Under the sun of late July, the lake waves were sparkling deep blue far out and glass clear as they broke over the sandbar into Dr. Thorne's pool. A squadron of whirligig beetles surfaced warily and came towards him, leading little V-shaped shadow wakes across the tan sand bottom. A black swimmer rode delicately out of a green cloud of algae and snooped along a centigrade thermometer, which was suspended in the water from a driftwood twig. 3 p.m., wrote Dr. Thorne in a large stained notebook. Air temperature 32, water temperature. He leaned over to get a better look at the thermometer, and the black swimmer fled 28. Wind light, variable. Wave action, diminishing. Absence of drifted specimens. He dated a fresh sheet of paper. Headed it 14th day and began the bug count. He scribbled earnestly in the sun, a pleasant-faced man of 30 or so. He wore a Hawaiian shirt and shorts of delicious magenta color, decorated with most unbotanical green hibiscus. An old baseball cap was on his head. He skirted the 4x6 pool on the bar side and noted that the sand was continuing to pile up. It would not be long before the pool was stagnant, and each day brought new and fascinating changes in its population. Grinidae, Hydrophilidae, a Corixa hiding in the rubbish on the other end, some kind of larva beside a piece of waterlogged board. He'd better take a specimen or two of the L. intacta, sunning itself smugly on the thermometer. The black swimmer, its confidence returned, worked its little oars and zigzagged in and out of the trash in undulata, wrote Dr. Thorne. When the count was finished, he took a collecting bottle from the fishing creel hanging over his shoulder and maneuvered a few of the larvae into it. Using the handle of the net, he shoved them into position. And then he noticed that the clear algae-free end of the pool, something flashed with a light more golden than that of mere sun on water. He reached out the net to stir the loose sand away. It was not a pebble or a piece of chipped glass, as he had supposed. Instead, he fished out a small, drop-like object shaped like a marble with a tail. It was a beautiful little thing of pellucid amber color and tiny gold flecks. The streaks running through it. Sunlight glanced off its smooth sides, which was surprisingly free of the surface scratches that are the inevitable patina of flotsam in the sand-scoured dune. We are going to have to finish this in a little bit. We have been reading from Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Stories Not for the Nervous. If you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way or if you want to join the Discord server, all the information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.